Will Smith is significantly bigger than me. We are not the same size. Never gonna happen. No. I took that hit like Pacquiao.
Chris Rock, one of the greatest, if not the greatest living comedian.
By Will Smith. Chris got slapped in the face. When it happened, I thought it was fake.
The night kicked off like a classic Hollywood fantasy, cameras flashing, sequins sparkling under the lights, and the biggest names in entertainment all gathered in one room, putting on their best version of happiness for the world to see. And then, Will Smith stood up. What happened in the next 10 seconds? Music didn't just shift the mood of the night. It didn't just embarrass one man. It cracked something wide open, something Hollywood had spent years keeping tightly sealed. And what poured out of that moment stunned everyone who thought they understood how this industry really works. But here's the part nobody talks about enough. Will Smith didn't just slap Chris Rock. He unknowingly handed two of the greatest comedians alive the most cutting, unforgettable material of their careers. And when Chris Rock and Dave Chappelle finally spoke out, they didn't hold back. They didn't soften it. They didn't forgive. They tore into him. Stick with us. Because what these two revealed about Will Smith, his marriage, his mindset, his decisions, is music sharper, deeper, and more revealing than anything you've seen in a late-night monologue or a polished celebrity interview. This is the Hollywood moment no one saw coming, and it's still echoing. The night everything changed. Let's rewind, because the context matters. The 94th Academy Awards, held at the Dolby Theater in Hollywood. It was meant to be a celebration. Will Smith was seated front row with his wife, Jada Pinkett Smith, knowing or at least strongly feeling that this could be his moment. His performance as Richard Williams in King Richard was already being praised as one of the year's best. Chris Rock stepped onto the stage in a blue velvet tuxedo jacket, calm and confident, music carrying the energy of someone who's hosted this stage before. He scanned the audience, noticed Jada Pinkett Smith's shaved head caused by alopecia, an autoimmune condition that leads to hair loss, and delivered what he would later call the nicest joke he'd ever made. He compared her look to G.I. Jane. One line.
I love you, G.I. Jane.
A nod to Demi Moore's iconic shaved head role back in 1997. The audience reacted with light laughter. Jada rolled her eyes. And Will Smith, and this part really matters, initially smiled. He laughed. For a split second, everything felt normal. And then, something shifted. You could almost see it in his expression. Will Smith stood up, walked calmly toward the stage. Chris Rock was still holding the mic, likely thinking it was part of a bit until it wasn't. Will struck him across the face with an open hand. The sound, sharp and unmistakable, echoed through the entire Dolby Theater. The room froze. Confusion spread instantly. Was this scripted? Was it planned? Even Chris looked unsure. Then came Will's voice, loud and heated, echoing through the microphones from his front row seat. He shouted twice with rising anger, telling Chris to keep his wife's name out of his mouth. The language, uncensored for international audiences, made one thing very clear. Music, this was real. Chris, still processing what just happened, tried to carry on. And in doing so, he delivered 8 words that instantly became part of comedy history. That was the greatest night in the history of television. No security stepped in. No one escorted Will Smith out. The show moved forward like nothing had happened. And less than 40 minutes later, Will Smith walked on stage again, this time to accept the Oscar for Best Actor.
And the Oscar goes to
Will Smith!
Let that sink in for a second. He walked back onto that same stage. He got a standing ovation from the very room that had just watched him cross a serious line. Then came a long, emotional speech about love and protecting his family. He teared up and Hollywood applauded. Watching from home, Jim Carrey said on CBS Mornings what a lot of people were already thinking. You don't have the right to walk on stage and hit someone just because of words. And that standing ovation, he called it out as a kind of spineless reaction that was honestly unsettling. The comedy world backed Chris Rock almost instantly, not just out of loyalty, but because they knew what was really at stake. If physical aggression toward comedians ever became acceptable, if it was rewarded instead of checked, then an art form built on risk, honesty, and pushing boundaries was in trouble. 4 days later, Will Smith resigned from the Academy. Soon after, he was banned from attending the Oscars for 10 years. He kept the award. And Chris Rock? He stayed quiet for nearly a year. But before Chris finally said his piece, something else happened. Something that connected everything in a way no one expected. Dave Chappelle was rushed on stage. And it happened just 5 weeks later. The invisible line was gone. Think about how things used to work before the 27th of March, 2022. There was an unspoken rule, call it an invisible fence between performers and audiences. You could heckle, you could walk out, you could protest, but you didn't storm the stage. That just wasn't done. In 10 seconds, that line was erased. 5 weeks after the Oscars, Dave Chappelle was performing at the Hollywood Bowl during Netflix's Netflix is a Joke festival. Near the end of his set, a 2-3-year-old named Isaiah Lee got past security, jumped the barrier, and tackled Chappelle on stage.
Overnight, comedian Dave Chappelle attacked on stage while performing at the Hollywood Bowl.
He was carrying a replica gun that had been modified with a folding knife blade. Security rushed in immediately, along with several people from the audience, including Jamie Foxx and Busta Rhymes. Lee was taken into custody and later charged with 4 misdemeanors. Chappelle was shaken, but thankfully not seriously hurt. Just 2 days later, at a surprise show at the Comedy Store in Los Angeles, Chappelle was back on stage, and right there with him, Chris Rock. What happened next instantly became comedy legend. Chappelle joked that at least Chris got hit by someone well-known, while he got tackled by a guy who looked like he'd rolled in from the street with leaves in his hair. Chris fired back with a line that hit deep. He said he got smacked by the softest rapper ever. Pause on that. With just a few words, Chris Rock did what endless online debates couldn't. He didn't frame Will as dangerous. He didn't call him unstable. He called him soft. He pointed straight at Will Smith's early music career, the Gettin' Jiggy With It days, the summertime era, and flipped it into a statement. Even that moment of aggression felt more like performance than reality. Comedy club owners across the country started connecting the dots almost immediately. One of them described that invisible fence and explained how, before the Oscars, audiences simply didn't cross it. Comedians could push limits, and crowds might push back, but not physically. After that moment, she warned it could inspire copycats, that something had shifted, and people might now see that behavior as possible or even acceptable. Howie Mandel put it even more bluntly. When aggression shows up, it can trigger more of the same, and he feared it could signal a turning point for comedy. That's the part most people miss in the celebrity version of this story. This wasn't just about 2 famous names clashing. The effects were immediate and real. Venues started rethinking security. Comedians began considering physical distance from their audiences. That invisible line was gone, and the entire stand-up world was left asking, what now? So what did Chris Rock and Dave Chappelle do? Did they pull back? Play it safe? Not even close. They went the other way. And that's when things got really interesting. 4 months after the Oscars, Chris Rock and Dave Chappelle kicked off a joint comedy tour starting in Liverpool, England at the M&S Bank Arena on the 1st of September 2022. The tour wasn't originally planned as a response, but it quickly became the stage where both men delivered their first real, unfiltered reactions to everything that had happened. And what they said in Liverpool, that set the tone for everything that came next. Chris walked out first, and he told the crowd that Will Smith's YouTube apology video is greater than
Chris, I apologize to you.
The video Will posted in July 2022 directly addressing Chris didn't land the way you might expect. To Chris, it felt more like a hostage tape than a sincere apology. That's a brutal way to frame it. Not heartfelt, not personal, more like a carefully managed PR moment, another performance for the cameras. Just like everything else in Will Smith's world, when that apology started circulating online, with Will expressing hope that they could eventually be on good terms again, Chris made his position crystal clear. He wasn't interested. He also pointed out something simple but real: the hit still hurt. And then he added a sharp comparison. Will Smith played Muhammad Ali on screen, but Chris Rock joked he couldn't even play Floyd Mayweather. The line landed because it underlined the obvious. This wasn't an even situation. A physically strong, trained actor hit a smaller comedian on a global stage. There was no balance there. Chris even started calling him music. Sug Smith, drawing a parallel to Suge Knight, the former music executive now serving a long prison sentence. That comparison wasn't random, it was deliberate. A heavy, calculated jab designed to stick. Then Dave Chappelle stepped in and took things to another level. He said people tend to forget who Will Smith really is. That just minutes before receiving the biggest award of his life, he reacted like he was back in Philadelphia. Chappelle was referencing Will's roots in West Philly, suggesting that beneath decades of polished Hollywood image, beneath the Fresh Prince, the blockbuster star, the clean-cut family man, there's always been something more raw under the surface. And then came the line people still talk about. Chappelle said Will Smith spent 30 years playing the role of a perfect man, And in that moment, the mask slipped. That's not just an insult, it's a deeper take. He wasn't saying this was out of character. He was saying it revealed something that had always been there, just hidden behind years of image control. And it all came out at the worst possible time, in front of the biggest possible audience. But Chappelle didn't stop there. He added something unexpected. He said whatever happens next, he hopes Will doesn't try to put that mask back on, that he lets his real self exist openly. And then he made it personal, saying he sees a bit of himself in both men. That's what made his take different. It wasn't just criticism, it was reflection. He was digging into something bigger, fame, pressure, and what it costs to maintain a public image that doesn't fully match who you are behind the scenes. For decades, Will Smith had been seen as the safe choice. Likeable, family-friendly, free of controversy. That moment challenged all of it. The tour kept moving across Europe, including London's O2 Arena and beyond. Rock and Dave Chappelle mostly performed their own sets, but shared the spotlight and occasionally bounced off each other, revisiting what they had both experienced. Their presence alone sent a message. They weren't silenced. If anything, they had more to say. And the strongest material? It was still on the way. Selective outrage. The moment that turned into a global headline. On the 4th of March, 2023, almost exactly 1 year after the Oscars, Netflix aired its first ever live comedy special, Chris Rock. Selective Outrage, streamed from Baltimore's Hippodrome Theater. The rollout felt massive. Pre-shows, after-shows, big-name appearances. It was treated like a full-scale event. Chris walked on stage, dressed all in white, wearing a Prince-style necklace, and opened with a line dripping in sarcasm, saying he'd try to get through the night without offending anyone. Because you never know who might take it personally. For the next hour, he covered everything from modern culture debates to the Kardashians, Meghan Markle, and the idea of selective outrage itself, describing it as how people pick and choose who gets called out, and for what. He had been setting it up the entire time, slowly sharpening the blade, building tension, and then, with about 10 minutes left, he flipped the switch. He started by addressing the moment everyone was waiting for. He said he'd been hit by someone he genuinely respected. He reminded the audience that he stayed quiet for almost a year, even as people kept asking the same question, did it hurt? So he finally answered it. It still hurts. Then came the first sharp hit. He joked that he still has summertime ringing in his ear. That line did more than get a laugh. It flipped one of Will Smith's biggest hits into a reminder of the moment itself. The same song that helped launch Will's career was now tied to the sound of that impact. From there, Chris shifted to the physical reality. He pointed out the obvious: Will Smith is bigger, stronger. He played Muhammad Ali. Meanwhile, Chris joked that he played Pookie in New Jack City, and even a piece of corn in Pootie Tang. The self-deprecating angle worked perfectly. He wasn't playing the victim. He was grounding the moment in reality. This wasn't equal ground. It was a larger man hitting a smaller one. Live in front of the world. And then he delivered the core idea, the point that turned the whole set into something bigger than just jokes. Chris said everyone in the room knew what happened. And anyone who really understood the situation knew one thing. Clearly, he had nothing to do with any of it, because he didn't have any entanglements. That single word hit hard. It was a direct callback to the now infamous Red Table Talk episode, where Jada Pinkett Smith described her relationship with singer August Alsina as an entanglement. That moment had already become a major cultural talking point, and Chris used it as the centerpiece of his argument. He wasn't just bringing up old headlines. He was making a pointed claim. That situation had publicly embarrassed Will Smith. The internet ran with it. The clips, the reactions, it was everywhere. And in Chris's framing, Will couldn't respond to the people actually involved. He couldn't respond to the online noise. So instead, he responded to Chris, someone smaller, someone who wasn't going to fight back. On a stage where cameras would capture every second, Chris laid it out clearly. People had been saying things about Will. People had been saying things about his wife. But who did he actually go after? Chris? And then came the word that stuck. Weak. Not dangerous. Not unpredictable. Weak. That's what made it land. Because it reframed the entire moment, not as strength or protection, but as misplaced anger. A reaction directed at the wrong target in the most public way possible. Then Chris added context from years earlier. He reminded the audience that back in 2016, Jada had publicly suggested he shouldn't host the Oscars because Will wasn't nominated for concussion. In his view, that's where the tension started, being asked to step aside over something he had no control over. And now, years later, that same situation had escalated into something physical. He even flipped it into a wordplay moment referencing concussion while joking about what had just happened to him. Classic Chris Rock taking a serious situation and finding the angle that still lands a laugh. But then, he shifted again this time. More personal. He said he'd admired Will Smith for most of his life, watched his career, supported him, rooted for him, and now, he joked that when he watches Emancipation, he finds himself reacting differently. It was a dark, uncomfortable line, but delivered in a way that forced the audience to laugh while still thinking about it. And finally, he addressed the one question everyone had been asking for a year: why didn't he hit back? His answer was simple, but it hit hard. He said he was raised a certain way, and one thing he learned growing up was not to fight in front of certain audiences. That line flipped everything. It reframed his silence not as weakness, but as control, as awareness, as a decision. It wasn't that he didn't feel anything, it's that he chose how to respond. And according to reports close to Will Smith, he didn't watch the special himself. He didn't watch it himself. Instead, he had people relay what was said. And from what's been reported, he felt both embarrassed and hurt. In his view, after attempting to make things right, Chris should have let it go. He was also reportedly frustrated that Netflix gave the moment such a massive platform and felt that bringing Jada back into the conversation crossed a line. So here's the question worth sitting with. Was Chris Rock's response justified a necessary public reckoning? Or did it go too far by pulling Jada and their relationship back into the spotlight? Drop your thoughts, because this is easily one of the most debated angles of the entire story. The Dreamer. Chappelle's philosophical take. On the 31st of December 2023 New Year's Eve, Netflix released Dave Chappelle's stand-up special, The Dreamer. It didn't zero in on the incident the same way Chris Rock's selective outrage did, but Chappelle still spent a significant amount of time unpacking it. His approach felt different, more reflective, more layered. Less about calling someone out and more about trying to understand what really happened underneath it all. Chappelle opened by calling the moment one of the wildest things he'd ever seen.
You're going to Saudi Arabia. Dave Chappelle said that it was in the press today, you can speak more freely over here than in America.
He admitted that when he first watched it live, he genuinely thought it was staged. The idea that something real like that could happen at the Oscars just didn't seem believable, even as it was unfolding. Then he shared something personal that hadn't been widely known. After the incident, he waited about 30 to 40 minutes, figuring that was enough time for Chris to leave and get somewhere else, and then called him on FaceTime. Chris picked up right away, and according to Chappelle, Chris told him something surprising: he hadn't answered anyone else's calls. Not from major public figures, not from global icons, but he answered Dave. That detail matters because it shows where Chris was mentally. He wasn't looking for public sympathy or high-profile check-ins. He didn't want to be treated like a headline. He wanted to talk to someone who understood the situation from the inside, someone who saw him as a peer, not a story. Chappelle also added one of the darkest but funniest observations across both specials. He said he doesn't know exactly how he would have reacted if he were in that situation, but he does know one thing: Will Smith wouldn't have enjoyed the rest of his night. That line carried weight. It hinted at consequences delivered in a way only Chappelle can, and it landed differently than Chris's approach, because Chappelle exists in a different lane, less polished, less filtered, and often more direct in tone. But what really sets The Dreamer apart is this: Chappelle insisted on seeing Will Smith as human. Where Chris framed Will as calculated and weak, Chappelle framed him as flawed and real. In his view, that moment wasn't completely out of character. It was the moment the image cracked. For decades, Will had presented a near-perfect version of himself to the world, and in that instant, something underneath showed through. Chappelle brought back the same idea he mentioned earlier, that Will had spent years playing the role of a perfect man. And eventually, that kind of pressure has a cost. His tone wasn't about excusing what happened. It was about explaining it, about recognizing that fame doesn't remove human struggles, it amplifies them. And maintaining a spotless public image for decades can create pressure that eventually has to release somehow. Chappelle even said he sees parts of himself in both sides. He understands Chris's position, and he understands the frustration that can build behind the scenes. That's what makes his perspective stand out. It's not just commentary, it's reflection. Together, Selective Outrage and The Dreamer gave two very different but equally compelling responses to the same moment. Chris came with direct, personal accountability, sharp, unapologetic, and public. Chappelle came with perspective, looking beyond the action to understand the cause. So which one resonates more with you? Was Chris right to go all in? Or did Chappelle get closer to the deeper truth? It's one of those rare situations where both viewpoints feel valid at the same time. The lasting impact on Will Smith. Now we get to the part that really lingers. Because when everything settled after the specials, the tours, the endless discussions, the person whose reputation took the biggest hit wasn't the one on stage telling the jokes, it was Will Smith. Before the 27th of March 2022, his career was almost unmatched. From The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air to blockbuster hits to award-worthy performances, he managed something very few stars ever do, decades in the spotlight without a major public controversy. He was widely liked, across generations, across audiences, across genres. Studios trusted him. Fans trusted him. He was the kind of star people rooted for. And then, in a matter of seconds, that image changed. You bought a ticket to a Will Smith movie, and you knew exactly what you were getting. You knew you were in safe hands. Think about what that kind of reputation really means. 3 decades of carefully built image. 30 years of interviews where he came across as charming, humble, relatable. 30 years of navigating Hollywood's toughest spaces without a single major scandal sticking. That doesn't happen by chance. That's discipline. That's strategy. That's an identity built piece by piece and protected at every step, and it all unraveled in about 10 seconds. The 10-year Oscars ban? That's the official consequence. The Academy putting something on record, drawing a visible line. But the unofficial fallout, that's bigger and likely longer lasting, because you can't vote that away. Now, Will Smith's name is permanently tied to that moment. Every interview, every red carpet appearance, every new project carries that shadow. His attempts to rebuild through the YouTube apology, the Emancipation press run, the slow return to social media have all been met with a level of skepticism that doesn't fade easily. It follows. And then there's the timing. Emancipation, his first major project after everything, was a serious, powerful film. A story about endurance, dignity, survival. Under normal circumstances, it could have sparked award buzz again. Instead, it became background noise. The conversation never really centered on the film. It stayed on him, on whether audiences could separate the performance from the person, on whether they even wanted to. Chris Rock's special made sure of that, because the narrative didn't settle into a bad moment. The version that took hold, the one Chris spent a year shaping before delivering it to millions, was far more pointed. That Will Smith, after being publicly embarrassed in his personal life, couldn't respond to the real source of that frustration, and instead redirected it towards someone smaller in a moment where he knew cameras were rolling and knew there wouldn't be retaliation. Whether you agree with that or not, it's a powerful framing, because it shifts the moment from something impulsive to something intentional. Not just emotion, but decision. And more than that, it labels the decision as weak. That didn't come from headlines or speculation. It came from Chris Rock himself, the person who was on that stage, who experienced it directly, who took a full year before responding carefully, deliberately, and then delivered it to a global audience. Then Dave Chappelle added another layer entirely, where Chris focused on the action. Chappelle focused on identity. His mask idea doesn't just explain one moment, it questions everything before it. It suggests that the version of Will Smith the public knew for decades, the friendly, composed, always in control figure may have always been, at least in part, a performance. That underneath it all was someone more complicated, more human, less polished, and that the Oscars moment wasn't a break from that reality. It was a glimpse of it. That kind of perspective hits differently, because it doesn't just attach one incident to a name, it makes people rethink the entire story that came before it. Every interview, every speech, every moment that felt genuine. Was it all real, or was it managed? Together, Selective Outrage and The Dreamer became something like a cultural verdict. Not legal. Chris chose not to press charges, and that was always his decision, but reputational. Two of the most respected voices in comedy looked at what happened, broke it down publicly, and shared their interpretations with millions of people around the world. That kind of impact doesn't disappear overnight. It's not something one good performance can erase. And yet, what comes next is still uncertain. Because Hollywood has a complicated relationship with redemption. The industry has welcomed people back from far worse. It has overlooked more serious situations when the person involved remained valuable financially, creatively, or culturally. So the real question is, will Smith's story follow that same pattern? Or is this one moment too defining to move past? Whether Will Smith can land a project strong enough, a performance powerful enough, or a moment of real, undeniable honesty that shifts the narrative, that's still an open question. And the answer will reveal something interesting about what the industry truly values versus what it claims to value: music. Dave Chappelle made one thing clear: if there is a path back, it doesn't come from polished apology videos or carefully managed PR. It comes from something real, from dropping the mask and letting the truth show just as he described it. The real question is, can someone who spent 30 years building a flawless public image actually let that go? And not just Will Smith, any star in that position. So, what do you think? Is his career still recoverable? Can someone come back from something this visible, this analyzed, this replayed over and over again? Or has everything from the moment itself to the comedy specials to years of online scrutiny permanently changed how people see him? Drop your honest take, because how people answer that says a lot about what we actually expect from celebrities when they fall. What this changed about comedy. Now zoom out for a second, because this story isn't just about one actor or one incident. The ripple effects hit the entire world of stand-up. That unspoken invisible fence, it's gone. Danny Zoldan, owner of Stand Up NY, put it perfectly. There used to be a kind of social contract. It wasn't written anywhere. It wasn't enforced. But everyone understood it. Audiences didn't rush the stage. Comedians could push limits. The worst case? Someone heckles. Someone walks out. That was it. The Oscars moment, broadcast worldwide, followed by relatively limited immediate consequences, shook that understanding. And the copycat effect showed up fast. Dave Chappelle being rushed on stage just weeks later was the clearest example. But it didn't stop there. Comedians started reporting tighter security concerns, more unpredictable crowds, a shift in the energy. Venues had to adapt. Barriers were added. Security increased. Clubs started thinking about risks they'd never seriously considered before. But here's the other side of it. Chris Rock and Dave Chappelle didn't pull back. They didn't soften their material. They didn't start playing it safe. They went bigger. They toured. They performed in packed venues. And they turned what happened to them into some of the most talked about material in years. That takes a specific kind of courage. Stand-up is already one of the most exposed forms of performance. One person, one mic, no backup. And the entire act depends on a basic level of trust with the audience. When that trust breaks, the easy move is to protect yourself, play it safe, avoid risks, build walls. They chose the opposite, and by doing that, they made a statement without even needing to say it out loud. Comedy doesn't get silenced by pressure. If anything, it gets sharper. That's the legacy that goes beyond any single joke or feud. Two of the biggest voices in comedy refuse to let one moment redefine their limits, where it all lands. After everything, we're left with two very different interpretations. Chris Rock's version is direct and cutting, that Will Smith acted the way he did because he could, because the moment, the setting, and the situation allowed it. A calculated reaction in a very public space. Dave Chappelle's version goes deeper. That fame creates a version of a person, a mask, and that maintaining that image comes with pressure. And when it cracks, what comes out is the real, unfiltered version underneath. And then there's what Chris did next. He stayed quiet for a year, then turned that silence into one of the sharpest stand-up performances of his career. Delivered it in front of millions and said exactly what he wanted to say. No legal battles, no retaliation, just the stage. Both comedians went back to what they do best. And maybe that's the takeaway here. When someone tries to shut you down, the strongest response isn't silence. It's saying more, saying it better, making it count. Chris Rock and Dave Chappelle didn't just move on from that moment. They turned it into something that will last longer than the headlines, longer than the reactions, longer than the cycle itself. And as for Will Smith, one moment changed everything. And in return, he faced one of the most precise public breakdowns of a celebrity image we've seen in years. Not from courts or media investigations, but from two comedians, on stage, with nothing but a mic, and the willingness to speak openly. That's what comedy looks like at its highest level. It says the things others won't.